Well, thanks so much for joining us. Where I'm at, I'm currently in Eastern time zone, so it's noon for folks. I know that there are some folks like Bryce that are here in the earlier morning, and then for you to join us at 9:30 p.m. Thanks so much.
Happy to join. It's good. It's good.
Um,
I don't sleep early, so yeah.
I love that. I feel like 9:30 p.m. is where I'd prefer to do most of my meetings anyway. Well, I'm super excited to invite Ntasha to the conversation. She graduated, just kind of give everyone a little bit of background on kind of what she's been doing. She graduated from Rutgers as a criminologist and specializes as a gender specialist. You know, her work really centers at the intersection, so to speak, of gender, crime, and justice. And you've done like research in all parts of the world. Bangladesh, Ethiopia, my favorite country of Sri Lanka, and then in the US. And then in the last year or so, if I'm not mistaken, you've spent most of your time at the UN Women at UN Women as a technical consultant doing a lot of the safety initiative with the Ministry of Women and Child Development, and really applying kind of a gender lens to India 620. And I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about what that is and how you take a research lens to that work. And then that was prior. And then now you're doing work in Goa, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Awesome. Well, I love that. I'm really excited. We've previously hosted folks that have done some international development and international research work, but it's been a long time. So I'm excited to get back into the conversation and learn more about what that looks like. But before we kind of get into like current day, what does it look like to work with the UN? I kind of want to like take a step back. I think in large part because your story is really interesting to me in that you've always known that you've wanted to work in industry space, which I think is similar to some of the rest of us, but you've actually come from a space that was really supportive of that. And so I want to just kind of learn a little bit more about, you know, you spent time in India, you got your master's degree there, you knew you always wanted to go to industry. Can you talk to us a little bit about like why you knew that was true for you, and then what specifically, why India as a larger place is really pushing for that and was supportive of that?
Okay. So yeah, I think for me, I kind of always knew I wanted to be industry because India has like okay. So just for context, I'm a trained criminologist, but India really doesn't have like structured criminology, criminal justice programs as many as like, I mean, there are a few now. It's definitely a growing field. So yeah, when I was getting so I got my first master's here in social work. So they had like a specialization in criminology. That was the only way to study criminology. We had a massive fieldwork component, and most of the training in India, like pretty different from what I saw living in America, gears you to be in the industry. So the academic space is similar to America. It's actually shifting more towards tenure track and all here now. It's interesting though, because it doesn't look the same. The jobs are interesting, stable. But for me, it was kind of, I always knew that I wanted to kind of see a real world impact of my work. And I guess I grew up in a home where, so my dad served in the Indian Navy. So working for the government was something kind of in my, head, like it was kind of just there. So yeah, I think part of the reason I moved to America is because I wanted good methods training, which was missing from my Indian training. But I didn't get into the PhD program. I had to repeat my master's. And then American academia, which I don't know, it's been 4 years since not 4 years since I finished. I finished in Jan 2023, but 4 years since I've moved back. Yeah, and I think the whole time I was there, I had I'm still very good friends with her, a very supportive research advisor who was kind of like, you do what you want, but the whole kind of system was geared towards pushing you to publish and get a job in academia after. So I think I had a moment maybe for like a few years where I was like, this is the way to go. Everyone's doing it. And it was like this, when I look back at it now, I'm like, oh my God, like, how did I deal with that? I was very overwhelmed by it, but I dealt with it. Amanda, who's on this call, we were going through it together. And I think, to be very open, it was kind of looked down upon. Like, you get a PhD and then move into the industry, or you shouldn't have a very active research agenda, which is like geared towards the industry. But I kept that alive throughout. I interned with Vera Institute. I interned with the what was that time the National Council for Research Women, which is now ICRW. And I think the biggest shock came is when I actually interviewed for my first tenure track job, which I ended up getting, which was great. And that's like the dream for most Indians who get PhDs there. You can get like visa sponsorship. But for me, it was just really clear that I wanted to do actionable research. And that's what I kept doing throughout my PhD. So my whole research agenda was in South Asia. And my, again, Rutgers was so supportive. They were very okay with, me conducting my research here. So I think it was like it was a constant push and pull. But yeah, I think because I kept kind of doing research, which I saw like a clear policy outcome for or something that can be continued, that's how I got my landing. And now it's been, I guess, 4 years that I've been, so I started working full time pretty much like 3 years ago when I had a lot of my dissertation written. Yeah, sometimes I miss being in academia. I love teaching, but it was never where my heart was at. I still think maybe for a year or two I might go back. But I think for me, what was very important was kind of, also interacting with other people. Rutgers had faculty who had worked in the industry, so they were able to guide me. But yeah, honestly, like, I shared with you earlier as well, I kind of shaped my own path, right? Like kept trying to reach out to people. So yeah, I think I kind of answered that all over the place.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think one of the things is true is that what I hear from you is that you came from a place like India that's very pro industry to a place like the US where this I think the support is changing and evolving, but wasn't the same level of support for industry. And there was a lot of work that you had to do while at Rutgers to kind of make sure that you still got to move towards industry. And I'm wondering, you said that you made connections with faculty who had been in the AltAc industry or otherwise. Are there other things that you did while you were in school to kind of stay strong to like, I'm going this way? You said that you interned at Vera, you interned at the International Research or the Center for Research with Women, right? You did those things. Is there anything else while you were in school that you did to try and like forge your path into industry?
I don't think I was doing it during my time living in America, because again, like it was so conflicting, right? It was like, another thing was how many tenure track jobs would let me continue my research agenda, right? So I was very clear that I wanted to study South Asia. Like I didn't want to switch. You see that with a lot of and full full support to a lot of scholars who move from here and like, I'm going to continue to study India, but then you get pushed into studying maybe something that you don't want to. So for me, it was kind of clear throughout. And it's been like a long journey. And it's very interesting that I work in safety now, because sometimes I think that was where I started my whole journey in criminology. Like, how do you create safer spaces and looking at gender-based violence? So I think for me, I just kept my, I kept my ear to the ground. And even something that I was very particular about while getting my PhD was kind of keep reading up on current affairs, how my work applies to it. And I was thinking about it today when like a media outlet reached out to me to comment on something. And I was like, it's something that I feel like was kind of missing. There was this other scholar at Rutgers who was kind of doing it pretty actively, who would be like, I want to comment and connect my work to real world work. So that's one of the things I did, but very informally. And then right when I moved back, that's when, there was a whole thing about like the model minority myth going on. And I started writing more, right? So I feel like one of the things missing from, and it's growing now, from academia, sometimes your research doesn't translate to like the larger audience. So I started writing. And it's something I really feel passionately about till this day. So I try like maybe in this 1 year, at least writing 2 to 3 pieces. So that's my connect. So I think those are the few things I did. But yeah, I think, I think a lot of my journey began after I moved back, and I'll talk a little about it. Like, how do you kind of tailor make your CV? How do you look for jobs? And I do feel like it's really changing, because I see a lot of industry jobs now being visible and for PhDs to apply. That was not the case when, I was finishing or thinking about finishing my PhD. So yeah.
I totally hear that. And I appreciate that kind of the nod to translational writing. I know too, through my journey, I spent a lot of time advocating to my faculty mentors I want to actually do much more translational writing than academic peer review, because that is the space where I'm going. That is the writing that will be required. So I totally appreciate that call out too. So we know then that you graduate from Rutgers or of sorts, and then you come back to India and you really like lean heavy on LinkedIn as like a primary source and end up finding Girl Effect. So before you kind of found Girl Effect, can you talk to us a little bit about like how you use LinkedIn? Because it's actually not a resource in my personal experience that was elevated in my doc program. It was like you don't really need that. And I think on the other side of things, I really need LinkedIn. And so I want to just hear kind of your experience with LinkedIn and then how you used it so thoughtfully and leveraged it.
So everything I share, honestly, I learned on my own, because even before this, and it's not like a flex. It's just that it may work, it may not work, right?
Sure. Sure.
So I moved back in 2020, and for the first 6 months, I started my own kind of research institute, which is still running, because I got an offer to do like a consultancy. So I was like, I'm going to anchor this. But then I realized that I don't really have industry experience. So I hadn't finished my PhD. So I had like written up everything, but not defended my prospectus. Everything was done. Honestly, I think LinkedIn came to me because I've been on LinkedIn and I've kind of used it to read up on other people outside of the industry.
Sure.
A lot of my peers who have nothing to do with criminology or even the social sector on it. And I just started plugging words in because, like I said, India is not as structured as America. So in America, I knew who the players were. Like if I had stayed in America, who would I want to work with, right? Like Veera was something big, Urban Institute. I knew who they were, like Rand.
Sure.
But in India, it was really tough. So one of the things that I did once I came back is I literally Googled industry experts, right? So who are the folks doing good research who may have a similar background as me, who had PhDs abroad, because then you know that you're kind of relying on a network which kind of understands you. Because I was getting a lot of advice. I was getting a lot of advice about you can do this, you can do that. And I guess similar to when I was choosing to do a PhD in criminology and everyone was like, why would you want to do that? Similarly, when I was moving back, everyone was like, why are you moving back? And and I think Girl Effect, literally, I think I plugged in words which I still plug in to LinkedIn, like gender equality, gender-based violence, and just started looking at jobs. And Girl Effect had like, I want to say I applied for maybe one job before the one I actually got. I literally just applied like, and again, a lot of people find this fascinating. It works. Even my UN gig, I got it through just applications, like no lies, there are no contacts, no network. And in fact, a lot of people now keep telling me that, you should lean on your network to get better gigs and stuff. But for me, I just plugged in the word gender equality. But then I also read up on them. I think the most important thing is like when you're writing these cover letters, everything. And I made this mistake. Sometimes just wrote like a generic cover letter, because at one point, I think I started applying to things, but I wasn't hearing back. I was just like nothing, right? So I was getting a little desperate. And like I said, I applied to a Girl Effect job, and I felt like that one was perfect for me. Obviously, there are like so many more applicants, but you think you should get picked, and nobody kind of replied to that. And then I wrote a cover letter, and I just got like I want to say there were 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. There was no written test. A lot of the gigs I've gotten, I mean, the 2 gigs I've gotten after that I've worked at usually have written tests. That's the other thing I've learned now. Yeah, and I feel like that it was the best start for me, because I might have kind of lowballed myself, So I looked at something that I knew I could definitely do, because this was going to be my first full-on paid non-internship industry experience, right? So it was a specialist role. And I think how it works is like specialist, manager, and then senior manager. But that gig was really great because within like a few months of me joining, like pretty much everybody who hired me and like 2 ranks above were like left for better things. So I was able to really show, then like really unleash the power of my PhD and my training. And then I really grew. And within a year, I want to say like, they changed my, like, not just my pay, but also like like somebody was reporting to me. It was really interesting. And yeah, I think the only thing I did was I changed my CV right away. So an academic CV, again, a lot of times you'll end up listing your like teaching experience, publications. They don't care about any of that, right? These guys wanted, they wanted my professional experience. So obviously I had like my education listed and then my professional experience. And yeah, and I think I was a great fit for it because literally they were looking for a person with strong methods training. And that's the one thing I had. And that's the one thing the hiring manager saw, who left within, I want to say 2 months of hiring me, but it was great. It worked out really well for me. So yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that I hear in that story too is, just like basically cold calling LinkedIn, so to speak, right? Just putting it in and then doing some research about that company. So that way, when you write a cover letter, it feels more tailored and on brand, and you understand how you align with what they're trying to do, even if it's at a high level because you found it on their About Us website. So I think that's really important. And then even the idea of recrafting your resume. I spend a lot of time with folks transitioning into industry spaces, deleting large parts of their CV that are really not irrelevant, but not as prioritized in this space. And then helping people think about how they talk about their work differently. And one of the things that you just said is that I am a gender I'm a gender specialist, but here that was about gender, but I was really a methodologist in this particular space. And I think it's interesting of knowing, like, I found this playground because they were doing gender work broadly, but my role here is about a methodologist, not necessarily as a gender specialist. And I think understanding how you can lean in and out of different like identities, so to speak, of your PhD, I think is one part of your story that I think is really important. I think the other thing that feels rare, but I think is not, is how often you can walk into entry-ish level jobs to get them to be in the door. And then I love the like unleashing the power. I like very visually felt that in my brain. And then showing people and in time actually renegotiating new roles and a new benefits package. I think folks think that could never happen. And I think it actually happens much more often than we give it credit for. And so I wonder then, like, for folks, like what would you say to folks that are like, I don't know, this role seems like it's too entry level for me. Like what, I guess, kind of what is the conversation there with folks there?
So there are a couple of conversations to be had. I think, and this is from my own experience, like really, there are certain things you will just not do. Like for me, I had seen that the jobs I could get after a master's level would be like 60% admin work and 40% research. I was just not willing to do that. So any job that I was going into or applying to, or let's say I made it to an interview stage, I was very clear that I want to do research. So I think there are like, it's really helpful to have a list of things. And I would say you absolutely need, you would like, and you absolutely don't want, right? So for me, I kind of, again, what's interesting in my PhD is that, yes, I came out as a mixed methods researcher, but maybe my policy experience isn't that good. So a lot of my work has that application, but it wasn't clear. So what was good about this Girl Effect role was that it was basically application of findings, strengthening kind of research methodologies. And it had said very clearly that there will be some amount of like program management built into it. And that's a skill that's really important. So when I went in and I was like, who needs to learn about budgets? Oh, you should learn about budgets. It's the one thing I can tell you. Get some program management experience, because that is something you'll see a lot of entry-level roles will have program management experience in them. And I didn't have it. I learned it on the job. Again, full credit to Girl Effect for like really teaching me that. And I think I just want to go back to something, each job you apply for, you should like tailor make your like whatever entry introduction line. So for me, I can be a gender specialist, but I can also be a mixed methods researcher, right? So it really depends on that. So the kind of jobs I see myself applying for right now are more research heavy. And again, I'm not applying for full-time jobs, but sometimes I just want like a small gig, because my current gig is very policy heavy. So I kind of miss research. So I'm looking for, a little bit of research experience. So I'm applying more for that. So I think that's what's important, right? And when you're starting, don't let people tell you that you won't be able to do a certain thing. Like if you absolutely have something you want to do, and the best way to think of it is this: you have methods training, right? You've done a dissertation, you've worked on a dissertation, you know some sort of research methodology. And then your specialization is literally what you're interested in and what you know a lot about, right? So for me, it was very clearly gender and violence. And I think those are the things, right? So like, what is your elevator pitch? Like what how would you describe yourself? And then based on that, I think it's important to apply to jobs. And I firmly believe, even if you think you're like a 60% match for a job, you should apply. Because last year, I didn't take up the gig, but I got offered a gig which had nothing to do with my research interest, like nothing. But they were looking for exactly someone who had the research training as me, right? So I ended up applying because it was on climate, and climate change is like a huge area with a lot of funding right now. So I was like, this will be helpful for my CV. Yeah, you'd be surprised more often than not. And that's the good thing about like being a PhD or having a really good like training in terms of PhD skills, that you can learn about a topic pretty quickly. And that's the one thing you need to leverage going into the industry, because how do I say, what's trending is constantly changing. In the 4 years that I've been back and been in the industry, how gender is studied and how grants are coming in for gender has rapidly evolved. And that's one of the things I've had to do. So like I said, like really pick kind of the topic you're interested in, but also pay attention to the research methodologies. So yeah, you have to keep constantly kind of changing your pitch based on that.
You know, I think that's true too, to some extent in the academy, right? That you're gonna, the grants are what also are gonna pay for you in the academy as a tenure track, and that's gonna require evolution. I think maybe not at the same speed or variance that it happens in industry. And one thing that I hear you saying for you, like, oh, I'll go study climate change and be a methodologist. And I think for folks that are moving into this space and navigating it, it's also understanding, like, I think you're right. Like, what are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do? Are you willing to be a methodologist that goes and learns and applies your method skills to lots of different topics that could be justice related? I mean, there is climate justice, right? Or are you really squarely like, I really want to stay in the, prison sandbox?
Mhm.
And so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's whatever best for you, but know the trade-off that you're making then by putting yourself in a smaller sandbox, right? Versus being like, I'll be a generalist. And I think one thing that's true in my experience, and I don't know about yours, but I really pushed throughout my time in the academy to learn to be a generalist. But I received some pushback about that there was some pressure to kind of specialize. Knowing what I know now is that I was glad that I stood strong to learning how to be a generalist and applying ideas to broad spaces. Do you think that's also your experience too, is like really trying to stay a generalist, but maybe that was a pushback that you experienced?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there was shame around you being like, I'm a gender person, right? For me, it was like gender, crime, justice, South Asia. It was vast, right? And um, in fact, I remember at one point like feeling like, wow, some people really know what they want to study and they don't want to look beyond it. And I'm like, and I used to feel a little like, because that's what I'm saying. For me, I feel like my journey started with like, why do people commit crimes? Oh, okay, they're not understandings in India, but like India is so unsafe. So it was like this large thing. And it's hilarious because I'm so glad it was so large, because it made me read widely. It made me research widely. It made me connect widely with different organizations. And the field is constantly evolving. And this is true globally. This is like, happening everywhere. So I think being a generalist actually goes a long way. And same thing, like also like learning how your methodologies apply. So like now in the field, evaluation, monitoring and evaluation is huge. You would think you've not learned this in your PhD, but actually you have. There are skills that just translate. So I think upskilling yourself all the time, reading like toolkits and what's coming out in the industry is very important. Yeah, and I think the cool thing about, like I said, like your PhD is that you're in one way you become quick learner or whatever. Like you understand how to learn. That's the one thing. Makes you resilient, and it makes you understand that you can learn different things. So it bodes well if you stay a generalist, because very rarely will you find jobs that, for 6 years are researching that one minor thing that you want. Usually it could start with like in my case, right? It started with like gender mainstreaming. Now it's gone into safe cities. Then it goes into safe tourism. It goes into different things. And like, yeah, like I've really been trying to upskill myself on climate. I don't try to provide any technical input there, but I can provide methods, like application there. So again, you have to kind of tweak yourself, and this is something you kind of have to learn on your own, because I don't know if a PhD kind of prepares you for it, because it kind of makes you, specifically if you're working on your dissertation, makes you hyper focus on one thing by the end of it, right? But again, that's the cool thing about your dissertation, how it looks on your CV, right? You have to position yourself versus it being your dissertation as a study you ran as like a PI, right? And those are literally the skills most industry jobs are looking for from PhDs. So
That's
yeah.
right. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate the conversation too about applying to jobs where you're only like 60% or perceive yourself as being 60% qualified, right? Or 50% qualified. I mean, I think a lot of job postings are written for the ideal candidate and like who would be the best at this. And then also recognizing that that unicorn might not exist and that you might be a really great fit for this in the experience, that 60% is actually pretty good for what they need. I know that after you were at Girl Effect, that you then moved to the UN and doing a lot of work with the UN, particularly with the India 620 presidency. And so I wonder if you could talk us through like how you found the UN job and then what that looks like to use research in these spaces, because as I imagine, it's much more infrastructure building rather than actual research.
Yeah. Yeah. So honestly, the UN thing was really interesting. So again, when I was getting my PhD, there was this whole thing about like, do you really want to work for the United Nations? So, but it was always a dream. I grew up in Delhi, where there was like the United Nations headquarters for India and stuff. And
Right.
you have this idea that, they have this kind of convening power and stuff. So it's very interesting. So I want to say I have applied to, I don't know how many UN gigs. I started applying when I was maybe a year or two from finishing my PhD, because there were a lot of like entry level, didn't need you to have a PhD. In fact, the role I landed also didn't need me. I finished my PhD when I got the gig, so I didn't have my PhD. And it was advertised as basically G20 is like a group of 20 countries. It's like they come together to discuss mostly things around economies and stuff. And India was helming the presidency. This was 2022 to 23. And they were just looking for somebody to work with the government who could kind of help the government, give the government technical advice on mainstreaming gender across the presidency. So now I have worked with the government completely differently because my prisons, my dissertation has a large aspect of working with the government. And this is Ministry of Women and Child when I was trying to work with the UN, and the ministry I had worked with is Home Affairs, completely different. But the basic skill set is there. Working with them, trying to get them to understand your work, try to get them to use your research. So I just leverage that and my background in gender, which is, for the last, I think at that time it was 10 years or 12 years, I had, kind of always had gender at the center of my work, but very differently, right? Gender inequality, gender-based violence. I think it was a standard like call. Again, I think I saw the call on LinkedIn. They have a UNDP page. Everybody who wants to apply to UN Women or any UN agency, you just have to go to UNDP jobs. They're always there. Anybody can apply. I think I got an email saying they wanted to see some writing samples. I replied to that. Then there was maybe a written test and then maybe 1 or 2 interviews. Yeah, and I think for each of them, I just kind of leveraged my strengths. Same thing, right? That I'm a gender scholar, but I'm just really good at working with the government. And yeah, that's how I got my foot through the door. And yeah, it was kind of like a dream come true because again, this is also, and I think in that 1 year, I really learned how policies are kind of made in India. So it's not like I had this great background in it, but technically I knew it. And professionally, I had kind of been in the sidelines, but not kind of held the person in charge role. But because of Girl Effect, I kind of had some kind of leadership experience. I was able to connect that. And yeah, and that was a great role because by the end, the leaders' declaration had gender equality commitments kind of solidified and agreed upon. And yeah, I think for me, and that led to my gig, which now actually is much more research heavy.
Yes.
So to be honest, it was a year of doing desk reviews. That's the best way to put it. Because but there was also this whole thing of like working with data, which was government data, helping the government understand. So my research I had was not a methods person at all. It was more of a how do you translate this research into real world stuff? So that was cool. I quite liked that, but yeah, I missed my methods training, and that's why that gig was not even over before I stepped into the next role, which was like really leading this work. And again, now I don't get to do the research, but I get to kind of support the organization that does the research. So yeah, it was a kind of a trade-off. And I think sometimes I really miss the research aspect of things, but it's a good trade-off because I'm learning to do like policy work. I've also realized my strengths really lie at working with governments. I'm really, good at kind of understanding how do you bridge that gap between what the government wants, what's actually happening. And it's very interesting because I feel like that's something I really wanted to do. So even when I was doing my PhD, I was sure that this work has to have real world impact. And a lot of people will disagree with me, who will be like, oh, if you want to have real world impact, you don't have to work with the government. I don't get that at all. So yeah, I think for me, it's one of those sometimes you have to give up like your main hat as like a researcher because I wanted to get into this space. And now I've come out again in this sort of like, okay, so I'm kind of a researcher, but I'm also like a government advisory person. And yeah, I'm at that phase and stage of my career where I'm trying to again kind of reformulate like, what else do I want to do? And some people find that exhausting. I find that exciting. So yeah.
Well, one of the things that I hear though, as part of it that I think is true is that, as a student, a lot of times, you could be in different programs that are strictly about the theoretical undergrounding of why people commit crime or how we measure it or how we evaluate it. But there's also programs that also specify on like the policy work. So like also how do the policies govern crime or not govern crime or govern safe spaces or not. And if you're in a place that's a bit more theoretical, you could also be doing work on your own of learning like what is the policies grounding this or how does your research have policy implications, right? I know we've had Dr. Pitts from Urban come in and talk a lot about how they spend a lot of time with their staff educating them on how does the research translate to policy. And that's certainly a skill that seems like if you were working on it now would translate pretty easily to what you were doing in the 620 initiative of really understanding here's what policy is, this is the data that can inform it, this is the data that now that the policy is here that we could be collecting from this policy, and you're still using a research lens, so to speak, but it's not necessarily doing research as it is educating folks almost on research and data literacy and providing that kind of data literacy to government officials to build the infrastructure to understand if their policies are effective or what's going on. I think one of the things that I also heard as you were talking is this idea of moving towards like policy work, consultancy, technical assistance. And it's not necessarily a big thing that I think I experienced a lot of it personally in my training, but I think it was largely because of the faculty I worked with. I don't see a lot of that at scale in the academy. And I wonder, like, do you think there's things that people could do to like at least learn at a small level, like how to think like a policy consultant or a technical assistant provider?
So I really learned on the job. And again, this is
Sure.
full credit to you and women as well. But again, I learned, no, but actually even Rutgers kind of prepared me for it because we had, when I think I wrote a grant application which talked about what were the policy implications for from my dissertation, and I think that's where I really started to understand. And again, this is training that's if it isn't there. A lot of programs don't push you to think like that, but it's a real world skill that you can kind of build on your own in terms of just even if you look up a policy brief, like you should know what a policy brief is, you should know what a theory of change is, you should know what a white paper is, right? These are like terms that yeah, I guess nobody told me about, but I kind of knew because I was always interested in policy. And I think, actually what's a great thing for anybody who's like thinking about maybe getting into the job market or will go into the job market in the next 3 years is kind of start looking up jobs already, right? And I don't mean to like add to your burden, but it can just be like a fun activity of one way to do it is see the kind of role you want. Some of them, if they're open, you can see what the qualifications are. And I like I said, if you fit if you're 60% there, you're doing great, and you can kind of build yourself towards it. But the other thing is also look at other people who have that job already and look at their training, right? And that's one of the things that I do now as well, because I want to move into more like a leadership oriented role. So I'm like, okay, how many years of supervisory experience do I need? So I think those are things that you can really prep yourself for. There are also all these really cool tools now, right? And I don't think these existed like 4 years ago, which talk about like really cool. I follow a bunch of folks again. So like a big fan of LinkedIn, but LinkedIn has really cool folks talking about how a theory of change is developed, how policies are developed. And again, I was just kind of thrown into the mix. Like right now, I'm writing a state action plan for 4 departments, for 4 governments in India, in Goa. So I had to learn really quickly what that looks like. And again, like a lot of these things are just tied into your writing skills, your research. So any kind of literature review you've done makes you synthesize literature, right? And that's a lot of what these policy briefs also, you synthesize it and then you look at where the gaps are and you look at, what you can do with it. So it's not really, it seems intimidating, but actually if you just get started and like kind of just look at basic policy briefs, how they're developed, you can. But yeah, you will learn a lot of things on the job as well. Like I said, like you will have to learn certain things. So yeah.
I think that makes it, I feel like in my experience too, I can see the things that I did prior applying, and I don't think I understood. I didn't know what I didn't know, so to speak, before. And now when I do it, I'm like, oh yeah, I vaguely remember that somebody said something about that before. But yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it is on the job, but I think that even goes back almost to your earlier point of like, yes, there are some entry level positions, but sometimes those entry level positions give you the exposure you need to connect the dots in this space. And then it's just a matter of critical thinking, to be frank, of putting them all together and then leveraging it for the next job. And I think one of the things that I so love about your story and your journey is your willingness to have maybe been punching below your belt, so to speak, and then used it as exposure and leveraged it to say, oh, wait, I got it now. Like, I understand how this works. Now let me go apply for the job that I'm probably a little bit more suited for. And yes, it was maybe a step backwards, but perhaps a step backwards to take 2 steps forward.
Yeah. And I think it's very important because sometimes, so again, this is my experience. Like coming out of a PhD, it takes you a second to also switch off your like student hat. So like moving right into a leadership role is not the smartest, right? And I've seen some of them where like if you have a PhD, you can move into like a manager role. Sometimes you can. And I think I was talking to another friend of mine about this, that technically if you've taught, you've kind of supervised people, right? So you can translate it. But baby steps help in that way. And again, while I was finishing my PhD, I started the Girl Effect job. So that really helped, right? So I wouldn't recommend that to anybody if you've not finished your dissertation. If you've not written it, do not take a full-time job. I mean, unless you need it for your finances. But really, because I have seen a few of my friends really struggle to finish, and finishing can also be tough. So I think it's kind of like gauging what makes sense for you the most. Like for me, I got a lot of my writing done and then started working. And yeah, so I also like kind of bought 2 years to finish to get myself ready for the role that I could kind of be at once my PhD is done. But, I think give yourself some, everyone's journey is different, because you would think that, and I think I've spoken to Amanda about this as well, like, okay, you finished your PhD and yeah, you've arrived. But no, actually, it's a whole new journey, because the industry looks very different from the academy. And some programs probably prepare you for it. Most don't. So you have a lot to learn, but you're actually very attractive to the industry, because you have a skill set that a lot of people don't without the PhD. So it's really about leveraging it and tailor making it. And being open. Like, I was very open that I don't know stuff about budgets. And now I don't shy away from budgets, because Girl Effect, I had to get them together. And yeah, your first job will teach you a lot. So be ready to.
I appreciate that. I mean, I also understood some things trickling about budgets. I had a faculty member that was really open of like pulling back the curtain for me and allowing me to see some things, but I build budgets for grants all day long. And so and then manage the budget in the application of the work. So I think, that's certainly another skill that's really, really useful. I think too, now you were able to, do Girl Effect, then transition to UN, and this presidency work. And then now you're at UN and doing much more research work, which is largely about building effectively the measurement infrastructure for safety initiatives. So can you talk to us a little bit about like what research looks like there?
So I actually really like my current gig, because it's at a state level. So as much as working at a central level in India was fun, I feel like you can get more done when it's a little smaller. And I've also had to take a step back, because we have what's called an implementing partner who actually does the work for us, right? So for me, again, it's about like providing technical advice to the government, providing support to a very great research organization. And I'm so happy because I get to learn all over again. They're doing these cool like needs assessments and stuff. And again, like, because the state I'm working in actually doesn't have too much previous work, it's starting from scratch. So it's exciting, but it's basic, right?
Yeah.
The cool thing is, again, right now we're like doing what are called gender audits, safety audits. Again, this is I've never done these before, but this is what's happening in our country, because we have so many issues around safety. So we're building new mechanisms to measure safety. Now, because of my previous methods training, I'm able to at least give input on what works and what wouldn't work, right? So again, it's not like I was trained in these, but it's something that I spent the first 6 months in this gig really, again, just upskilling myself to be like, okay, what is it? What does the literature say? UN Women has a flagship program called Safe Cities for implementing that. So this is more action-based research. We're not in the field in terms of like collecting data, but doing more like audits, understanding, budgets, specifically with like gender, how much money is being spent in different places. So again, it's an application of my previous training in a very different lens. I really enjoy it, because one of my roles is also convenings now. Again, something I didn't know I would have to do, but it's about bringing the different stakeholders at the table and getting them to talk to each other. Something I feel like, again, my PhD prepped me for, because I was always in these rooms with academics. Then you'd go into like CSO spaces, they're talking differently. Then you go to governments, they're talking differently. So yeah, the PhD really prepared me well, because again, I was very clear with my research then that it has to have like a tangible output. So yeah, I don't feel like I'm directly applying the research methods I maybe, super strengthened during my training. But yeah, it's different. And again, see, the challenge and the thing about this work is it's donor funded, right? So these are the other things you'll also learn. how long will this program last? Like, what will happen, right? So for me, really learning to do maximum amount of work in minimum amount of time, but with maximum impact. So those they're very different kind of stressors that I'm playing with now. I live in Goa, so being accountable to the stakeholders, it's a very small community. So yeah, it's again using a lot of my technical knowledge, but also very different upskilling in very different areas is what's happening right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds so cool. And I think it's about also for yourself understanding what kind of impact you want to have. Yes, you can have impact doing applied research and then handing it off or writing your findings. You can also have impact with the community, helping them build an infrastructure to measure their programs that they're implementing. It's not the actual research, but you're still building capacity of a local jurisdiction. That's still impactful.
Yeah.
I think it's about learning all the different ways in which you can be impactful. I, over time, have learned that I'd much rather do that part. I'd much rather build capacity of organizations and build capacity of communities than actually doing evaluative work. But it took me years of doing evaluative work to understand, oh, wait, this is great. And now I really like this a little bit more. And I think it's also learning too over time that your interests and how you want to apply your skill set might change, and allowing yourself to be flexible with your own evolution as a researcher as well.
That is so important, right? Like, I think maximum growth in your career will come from that. Like, don't have a standard idea of like, I have to do it this way. And that was tough for me because it was like, I got all this great methods training and now I'm not using it, right? But again, right, like I feel like the good thing about my current gig is that I also have the ability to still keep. So I haven't given up on my dissertation. I'm still publishing,
Yeah.
still working with the government on, applying some of the findings to basically one of the laws that we have on dowry. And that's what I've chosen for my life. And it's very interesting because a lot of people, even in India now, have been pushing me to be like, oh, do you just want to do this? You should like have a full-time academic gig because academia in India is also growing. And I was like, no, I like being anchored in my community. I like doing this convening of stakeholders, getting people to talk to each other, because I feel like I want to see my work have an impact, right? And this gig also gives me time to continue to do the work that still isn't funded in India. Criminology work is still not like where it should be, right? So because I'm making a decent living, that's the best way to put it, doing this work with another project now, I'm able to, still write about things, right? Like right now, The Guardian interviewed me on marital rape. These are things that are still very important to me, right?
Yeah.
For me, my work can't just be about me talking to academics or governments. Like it needs to percolate into like everybody. So being open to that. And I feel like sometimes if you want that kind of life, then you kind of have to give up sometimes full-time jobs, because some full-time jobs will not allow you to do that.
Yeah.
And I've gotten a lot of flack for it, where people be like, you could be doing this. So the best way to put it is, I think we get a lot of advice as well, because there's a very structured way of being in the industry post a PhD as well. And then there is this sort of kind of build your own way where you're doing a consultancy. You can also kind of get another gig with it. But yeah, I think really figuring out and taking a few years to figure it out is also good, because I know folks who knew right out the door, and folks who are like 20 years done with their PhD who are like, the best thing I did was like try different things, and now I know what works for me. So yeah.
I think that's really important. I think in my experience of helping people transition, not even just from faculty out, but even just students out, is the idea that the first job has to be the best job. And to be frank, it's probably not going to be. It's going to be, you're going to do it, get a feel for it, and then potentially move on in 2 years. And I think that is also something that's characteristically different from the academy, where you walk into universities and then the structure of a tenure track is that you are there, right, for the rest of your
Yeah.
journey as an academic, and particularly in the first 5 years, because the first 5 years are so structured. Where in industry, that is a different feel. You could walk into a job and after a year leave and it would be okay, or leave after 2 years, and you could go someplace else and be for 2 years and leave after 2 years. And you could keep doing this as often as you wanted. And there's no there's really no, as long as you're explaining the thread too, of like, I found this and then my journey took me here, and there's a framing. I think that like the movement in industry allows you to evolve and is also not frowned upon in the same way that movement doesn't structurally happen or make sense in the academy. And I think that's also something that as folks are in their academic programs, they might not be aware of because it's just not something that happens in the academy.
Yeah, and
I also want to make sure that I
sorry.
get to Tice's question too, where she had asked if, you know, if you had any tips for like how folks, like if people are halfway through their program and they're like, you know what, I'm pivoting to industry. I think this is where I'm really at, and particularly in government. How do you start networking with organizations or institutions to kind of narrow down like the type of government or the roles that you want in government?
I would say reach out to folks that you know are in roles or stuff, right? So for me, I didn't have that option because I was moving back to India, but I did. I spoke to a couple of folks, but their journey didn't align with mine. So just reach out to folks. Either you'll get the answers you want or you'll understand what you don't want to do. And I think you'd be surprised. Uh, I can say this very passionately and very proudly that anybody who ever emails me will always get a response. It might be like 1 month later, but you will. So you see a person, a PhD, newish PhD, who's doing something right there, they would most likely be happy to share. Like, don't shy away from that. And yeah, I think that's the best way to network. And I think usually, I don't know, many PhD programs are very competitive, but usually that competition kind of dies down. And after a point, everybody is collegiate. So ask for help. At Rutgers, I always find this funny. I reached out to like 4 or 5 of my professors at that point to just be like, what should my consultancy fee be? And they all wrote back to me saying, we have no idea. Right.
Yeah.
So it was kind of hilarious. Then I had to just kind of like figure out my own fee and, you know, go through my own journey with that. But reach out to folks and write to folks. And I think if you're in the middle of your program and if you can, then try getting like some sort of work X with, if not the org you want to work with a similar org. Because like for me, I still remember, I think it was the start of my PhD when I interned with Veera. And it had a massive impact on me because I was like, this is a cool setup. And I had these 2 really cool bosses at that time who really opened up and made me understand like what you have to do post a PhD to land their roles. And this was so early, so that left an impression. So I feel like trying to intern with them if you have time. A lot of these places, I know Rand and stuff have summer institutes. So like you make use of that time. I know you already have a lot going on with your PhD probably, but it'll help because either you'll be like, this is something I definitely want to do, or you'll be like, this is not for me. So yeah.
I definitely appreciate that. I also spent time in different places, and I think you're right on, and asking like, hey, if I want to come back here specifically, what do I need? And that was my journey specifically when I was at Vera for a minute. What do I need? And then I was much more equipped to come to my faculty advisors and say, these are the 3 things I was told that I need to figure out how to do to move back into this space. Like, how are we going to teach me these 3 things? And it's possible that you're already in your journey, but I think that you can still find that out by, I think you're right, doing internships, cold calling. I think you're totally right. And it's been my experience too of meeting folks in industry spaces. I know Bryce and Julia are on the call who are in industry spaces. I really consider this space much more of a team sport. And I feel like other people also feel that way. It's also in part, it's not a differentiator of the people that are in an academy versus industry. I think it's much more about the structures of the system. And so I think that folks are super open to talking about their experience, even to a total stranger who says, hey, I found you on LinkedIn. You look like you're doing cool stuff over there. I want to learn. I mean, like, who doesn't want to answer that email and be like, I am doing cool stuff over here. Let me tell you about it. It's daunting, but I think it's a really important part of the process.
Yeah. Important. It's like, yeah, like you said, I'm happy to get those emails. I'm always like, hey, let's get on a call, let's talk more, and something will come out of that call. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate that because what I do know is that you've given me permission to share your email with folks. And so with that, I'll send that out to folks. Feel free. Know that you are 9.5 hours ahead. So be considerate of the time zone difference. But listen, I so appreciate you coming and joining us, talking about the experience. I think one of the things that I heard consistently is this idea that you have to take ownership over your own journey too, and do a lot of education to consistently rebrand yourself with industry as the industries are evolving. And that the way to do that is to be reading about current events, reading about the way that new job postings are worded, what they're asking for, trying to keep log of what they're asking for and how that evolves. I also heard you say like grant applications, understanding how grant applications are evolving. And those are ways in which you can also learn to rebrand yourself over time with the industry. And I also heard from you really like being open, and just kind of letting your journey be what your journey needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for this opportunity because it really made me also think a lot. And I think, yeah, like I hope everybody on this call will also kind of, have that discussion with one more person because I feel like you're right. Like the industry, first of all, there are a lot of jobs out there. I know it's like a bad job market, people are saying stuff, but you will land something. And I just feel like that's the most important thing to know, that because of the training most folks have, it's just about finding the right fit. So like it can feel like daunting and overwhelming, but it's actually not that bad. And I think like asking for help and like maybe even getting somebody else to read your cover letter is important. Yeah, definitely, please just don't send generic cover letters and CVs to jobs. That's such a waste of time for like the recruiters. Like I remember when we were hiring at UN Women for this one position, oh my God, we got like some, I don't know, like 110 applications for like the most basic role, and it's like 95 of them were just not a fit. So like don't be that person, I think. So like don't send so many applications, and more often than not you will hear back. But I think yeah, it's not, I don't know, I'm hearing from a lot of people like it's grim and the funding's drying up. The funding's not actually drying up, it's just pivoting. It's constantly pivoting. And yeah, I think it's important. And there's some really great, like besides UNDP job, also there's DevX, which has some really good articles, which comes out on like what's going on in the industry. So beyond like the American Society of Criminology and all your regular folks that you anyways probably know, look at like these social development or the development sector newsletters to really understand what's going on in the field. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's it is I think it's also knowing a little bit about the language, right? That you really work in international development space is really much more the language than international research space. And I think how having folks understand kind of that too. Well, I so appreciate you joining us. I so appreciate all of the folks that joined us to hear from you and learn about your journey. And please feel free to reach out to Nasha and ask her more questions that we weren't able to cover today.
Yeah, please do.
Well, with that, I hope you have a great night. And we'll see everyone soon.
Super. Thank you so much. It was great chatting. See you. Bye.
Thanks.